Welcome to Oregon Voters Digest, the program that brings forward the social and political issues that are important to people living here in the Pacific Northwest. And now, your host, Bruce Broussard.
Welcome again to this segment of the Oregon Voters Digest. I'm Bruce Broussard, your host. Appreciate that today. Lovely day today, by the way, but however, we've got issues that we've got to deal with. Had a lovely day yesterday at the parade. Actually, I was very much involved in the parade, the good in the hood, if you will, here in the Portland metropolitan area. It was an excellent parade, well organized, the whole 9 yards. It was just fantastic. But now, today is Sunday, and here we are again with the Oregon Voters Digest. And I thought we'd shift a bit. In fact, I got this idea as a result of the parade. There were a number of kids that were in the parade, and I'm talking about located here in the northeast Portland area, which I has been identified as the so-called Portland Public Schools and the black community. It was a bunch of kids of all backgrounds and whatever. And I was just wondering about the issues that we've been having here in the Multnomah County area as far as Portland Public Schools. And it's always an issue, always an issue from the standpoint of how do we get these kids educated. And you always hear things, whether it be a bond-raising measure for buildings, or if not that, the lack of education in the school, in the classroom for kids, and this, that, and the other. And even there's talk about administration costs and this, that, and the other. And so I thought maybe, I think it would be a good idea to talk about the education of these kids and the costs, if you will. But let's maybe get into the defining what is the definition of education, and then again identifying as I said before, about what it costs and where could we go from here. So what I thought I would do, I'd invite someone that we've had on the show before, talking about the whole issue of education, if you will. But this way he's going to be a little bit more specific about this still. I'm talking about Art Robinson. Art has been around, and he's naturally from Southern Oregon to a certain degree, but in all due respect, he's throughout the state. He's been very much involved in one side of the spectrum of politics, but today it's not going to be about the politics. We're going to talk about another expertise that he has in education, and it was as a result, if you will, of his own, from a personal standpoint. So that's what we're going to do. The first half hour, we're going to do the defining of education, and then we're going to take a short break, and then maybe discuss the cost and how that cost and it's impacting us. But the bottom line is that what about the kids and in education here in the state of Oregon? Welcome aboard.
Welcome. Thank you for having me here.
Sounds good, Art. Well, look, why don't we do that? What do you think about that? And we talked a little bit about that.
Well,
how do we go from that?
I'd be inclined to start out with my opinion about education.
Yes, let's do that.
I taught at UC San Diego and Stanford, and I've been in K-12 education for 25 years. But I think it'd be better to quote real experts.
Okay.
And so I'm going to quote a man who is the greatest educator in American history, Booker T. Washington.
Really?
Booker T. Washington was born in a slave cabin in the South before the Civil War. After the war, he was raised in poverty in the North. But as a young boy, he sought an education. And he rose through his own merits to become a great orator, a great educator, an advisor to presidents, and the founder of a great university, Tuskegee University. Mm-hmm. He was, by all measures, the greatest educator our country has ever had.
African American, I understand.
He was a black man.
Yes.
And if you want to know about education, read Booker T. Washington's books. There were two of them in the end, because at Tuskegee, George Washington Carver joined him. But he wrote to his students, Booker T. Washington, what then do we mean by education? I could say that education is meant to give us an idea of truth. He's saying this to the students at Tuskegee.
Okay.
I do not care how much you get out of your textbooks. Unless you have got truth, you have failed in your purpose to be educated. Now, what he means by that is that you must learn to use your mind to find the truth through education, through educating your mind, so that on any subject that comes up in life, you have the self-confidence to know that you can take true facts and discern the truth and know the mechanisms of finding the truth. The other educator I'm going to quote in complication is Robert Millikan. Robert Millikan was a Nobel Prize winning scientist and the founder of the California Institute of Technology. Millikan wrote, first he made the motto of Caltech, "The truth shall make you free," the biblical statement, "The truth shall make you free." A lot like Booker T. Washington.
Yes.
Millikan went on to write, human well-being and all human progress rest at bottom upon twin pillars, the collapse of either one of which will bring down the whole structure. These two pillars are the cultivation and the dissemination throughout mankind of the spirit of religion and the spirit of knowledge and science. In other words, truth, because knowledge involves about the truth. He believed, and correctly, that if you have knowledge of the truth, then you have education. But that isn't sufficient because you also must have the ethical principles to use it wisely. He admired Jesus' statement that you should do unto others as they will do unto you, the golden rule, which, if you have that spirit, if you look upon things as how would you wish to be used, and you follow those religious principles, then your knowledge will be used productively. But to use it productively, you must know the truth. So education is primarily training a person's mind so that they can discern the truth and use the truth to reach conclusions that are beneficial to them and beneficial to their fellow man. If they don't consider their fellow man, Millikan feels that it falls anyway because the knowledge is not used productively. And this education doesn't necessarily mean you have to learn facts. You have to learn how to deal with facts. At the height of the Great British Empire, British schoolboys were taught how to read and write Latin and Greek, and they read the ancient authors. They were learning Latin and Greek even though they were going to be sailors and soldiers and workmen and shopkeepers, all professions that had nothing to do with Latin and Greek. It was just a form of knowledge that they used to train their minds. In our age, we have something better that they did not have. We have mathematics, we have science. And in math in school, you could say, well, I need to add and subtract and stuff, but why do I need algebra and trigonometry, and why do I need these other things? One of the benefits of studying them is that math is true. A math problem only has a right answer and a wrong answer. So a young person who does math problems for, say, an hour in the morning before he does his other schoolwork, his whole mindset is that I must look for the truth in everything I do. If I don't look for the truth in math, I'll get the problems wrong. It's harder to find the truth in some other subjects, but that's the purpose of education. So the training of a young mind, the educating of a young mind, according to our greatest educator, including, and Millikan was one of our greatest as well, great educators, and Isaac Newton, the same way.
Okay.
Isaac Newton, the greatest scientist who ever lived, believed that his study of science was there to learn the facts about what God had created, which would aid people in their movement toward their Lord. All of these men had something in common, and that was that education is finding the truth. That's what it's for. That's what he built. Tuskegee University. He built a university where it was free because he was so famous that he could go around the country and raise the money so that every student that went to Tuskegee University had a free scholarship. The students helped build the university, but he taught those students, these are facts, you learn these facts, but the main thing is you must learn to discern the truth. A man that has taught his mind to search for the factual truth in a matter, and who has good ethics, and has confidence that he with his mind can find the truth of a matter, is a man that can't be fooled and can have a good life and provide a good life for his family and those around him. And that's what these men think, and I think the same thing, led by them, and I've spent 50 years in education at the universities and since then. And That's true.
Now, the idea of that definition that you just gave, was that comparable to the majority community too, to other students?
Well, it's
for
not
the-
what they're doing in the public schools today.
Okay, okay, all right, okay.
No, in the public schools today, they have forgotten this, and they do a very poor job of it. We're going to talk about that later.
Right.
The second half hour, I
Right, the
think,
second
we're
half,
going
yeah,
to be
we're
talking
gonna
about
discuss,
the
yes,
public
right,
schools.
Right.
But that's the goal. And you can. This is important, regardless in simple things like 2 + 2 is 4. I'm a chemist. I have a Caltech education in chemistry, but I've forgotten a lot of the chemistry that I've learned. But I know in practicing my trade that I can go to the books on my shelf and find anything I need and understand it and apply it with confidence that I can apply the truth about that little bit of chemistry to my work. There are two things I need. First, either the knowledge or where to get the knowledge, and second, the self-confidence to know that I can utilize it. And that's what they're saying. You have to get the truth. Booker T. Washington is saying you've got to get the truth. You've got to know how to get the truth and understand it and apply it. It's not hard because you teach a young person in K through 12 to read and write. Read so that he can read. If he doesn't, you have to teach him to read before he's 7 years old because you can't be educated. You can't even, the knowledge is in books and you can't get it unless you can read. And then he needs to be trained so that he has confidence that his mind can take a set of facts, discern those for their true as opposed to those that are false, and reach conclusions that are beneficial to him and those for whom he's responsible. And we're seeing today how important that can be because there's so many lies being disseminated in the public domain, especially with the electronics we have, that it's necessary to have this skill. If you don't have the skill, you can be misled into all sorts of things which are harmful to you and harmful to your fellow man.
Now, you said that this all starts about 7 years old. Now, as far as the structure, like from grade 1 through 12,
Yeah.
what level?
Well, at first and second grade, a
first,
child
second
should
grade?
learn to read.
Learn to read.
And he starts to get simple arithmetic. Once he learns to read, then there are many things he must learn. And it is tradition, and a very good tradition in this country, that we make it possible for every child to get a K-12 education.
Right.
And it's been paid by the community since the beginning. The one-room schoolhouses were paid by the community of farmers that kids were going to schools. And we have an ethic, a very fine ethic, that we will not let anyone go without a K-12 education, or an opportunity for one. But you have to start out, with reading. And it's not hard to teach a child to read by phonics when he's 5, 6, 7 years old. And you must, because so much knowledge is in books. How can he work his math problems? You're going to read them to him? He's got to read the math book. And also, though math is simple, many things are complex. Many things, especially human affairs, are very complex. And in order to reach the truth in those things, it takes a lot of work, and it also requires guidance from scholars and people whose minds have approached these problems. So being able to read, be able to read the Constitution and the Bill of Rights before you understand what your country's about. And to be able to read about people from Mark Twain to Charles Dickens. These are people who thought about human affairs all their lives. Doesn't mean they were right on everything, but if a student reads them, learns to read and reads them, he will keep thinking the whole time he's reading and looking for those things that will cause him to either agree with them or disagree with them, and become a educated individual.
So comprehension actually takes place during that time, or right at the beginning?
Yeah, by reading, I mean
Yeah, by
reading
reading, yeah.
comprehension,
Yeah, right,
to be
right.
able to take a text and read it.
Right.
And understand what it says.
Right.
That's the way in which we disseminate our knowledge.
Okay.
And it isn't the specific knowledge. That's what Booker T. Washington said. He said, now he's teaching in the university. He's gotten scholarships for all these kids, and he gave a lecture to them once a week. This is taken from one of those lectures. He said, I don't care how much you get out of all your textbooks unless you have got truth, you will have failed in your purpose to be educated. In other words, he didn't mind if you read those textbooks and kind of forgot a lot of the details and specific information in them. What he wanted you to do was to learn to discern the truth. You go back and read them again if you forgot something. But your mindset had to be to learn the truth. Just as the Bible says the truth will make you free, and it's a double entendre because it's talking about the truth about Christ as well as the truth in other ways. The whole purpose of education is to learn to train your mind to find the truth and to do it enough that you have the self-confidence that you can on your own find it. Otherwise, your mind is enslaved to the opinions of others, and you're not a free man. You're enslaved mentally to the opinions of others, and that is not education. That's the opposite of education.
Well, and the other thing, the other word that comes up is motivation. That continues the.
Well, actually, motivation kind of takes care of itself. We publish a curriculum that's been used by 100,000 children, and I've spent a lot of time in education. When a person gets involved in educating himself, usually, if it's done well, he begins to like it. He begins to want it. You may not believe it, but if you have a school, there are many ways to teach. One way, my way, is 5 or 6 hours in a desk learning every day. The students will actually get to the point where they insist on doing it. They don't want to do anything. They want to have their lessons every day because they love doing it. If you are educating your mind and you're succeeding and you're being well educated, most people will get in a position where they really like it. Even though they may not like some particular subject, the whole process of being educated is a very, very enjoyable thing. Now, many of the people listening may not think so, they didn't like math because they had trouble with it or something like this. But most of that is because that subject wasn't being, they weren't learning the truth about the subject. There's a lot of, just in math alone, I don't mean to make a big deal out of that because there are a lot of parts of education, but when your mind wakes up every morning knowing that you're going to work 20 math problems today, and you're probably going to get most of them right the first time, that's a good feeling. You're going to do it by yourself. It's fun.
And what about the role of the teacher? Let's talk about that.
Well, the teacher, there are many ways of educating. So teachers have different roles and different methodologies, and I'm not here to promote one particular methodology. The most important role of the teacher is as an example. People learn by example. Children learn by example, and even whole nations learn by example. That's why the United States is even more important than it is to us, because the United States stands as an example of a constitutional republic to the whole world. And the world is a better place because of the example our nation has set. It's that way in human affairs. People learn by example. So, for example, let's suppose the teacher has given a lecture, she does something, teaching, but then she says, children, now you each have 10 problems. Please work your problems at your desks. Then she sits at her desk and does her paperwork. The teacher is working, and I'm working. She is doing her work, I'm doing my work. In a homeschool, a mother that does her paperwork at a desk in the schoolroom, mommy's doing her work, and I'm doing my work. It's by example. So the most important, and the teacher must set an example in other ways. So a teacher, the example she sets is the most important thing. The second most important thing is figuring out how to present the material in a useful way, and of course K through 12 has been going on so long, a lot is known about this, and figuring out how to help the student. If you help the student too much, he becomes dependent on you, and you want him to have the self-confidence to know that he can work the problem by himself. At the same time, you don't want him to get hung up and just go crazy because he can't catch something. So the second most important thing is for the teacher to discern and learn how to interact with the student to maximize his education. Mostly he's educating himself because It's you that works the problems. It's you that reads the books. They can give you a lesson, and if you succeed in completing the lesson, you have learned something, and if you don't, you haven't. So you don't want the student to fail. Another thing that's very important is how you meter the material to the student. Students are different. Some learn fast, some learn slow, and so all those things are involved. So the example the teacher sets is first. Figuring out how to help the student without making him dependent on you is another thing. And the methodology itself, which books are chosen and how it's metered to the student so he doesn't get behind because it went too fast or go too slow, so he's bored. Those are kind of the elements.
Now, as far as the teacher is concerned, what's her background in regards to being motivated, if you will, to focus on those main points that you were talking about in regards to the student?
The teacher?
Yes.
Well, firstly, if she wants to teach, she wants the students to learn.
Okay.
But as your wife was mentioning earlier at lunch, it's good to have education for the teachers, continuing education for the teachers. The teachers, nobody can suggest that anybody knows exactly how to optimally teach a particular student. So it's a complicated thing, training a human mind, and it's a good thing for the teachers to interact with other teachers and to have continuing education and so forth. It's a bad thing for non-teachers to get in the way. We're going to be talking about that later. There are a lot of non-teachers in our school systems that are in the way of our teachers, and that's not useful. That's counterproductive. But for teachers to have a lot of interaction with other teachers, continuing education, and be totally devoted to their subjects is very important. And it isn't just because you got a teaching credential, you're on the road and you know what to do. It's like, it would be like saying I'm a scientist so I can do anything. I'm sorry. Especially if I change field a little bit, I better be ready to talk to my peers.
Would that be also, as she go through K1 through K12, is that a continuum as far as the teacher is concerned, as far as...
Yes, there are various ways in that. You know, you have, in a public school, as you get up higher, they tend to have a math teacher and change grade. Every 45 minutes, the bell rings, you run to another class. I think that my own personal opinion is that that's counterproductive. I think the student should have a desk, a chair, in a room, and the teacher should be teaching everything to him. First, he doesn't have all these breaks. And secondly, the knowledge should be metered at the rate that the student can take it. So if you have a group of students, you don't even know. A student can go very fast through one subject and then slow and then fast. Like, I'll go back to math, but again, I don't need to keep qualifying it. Some math is easier, some math is harder, and that depends on the person. You don't know what's going to be easy for that person and what's going to be hard for that student. So you have to meter the math to the student in a way that is consistent with his rate of learning. The rate of learning is not going to determine where he goes. A slow learner could win a Nobel Prize, and a fast learner could waste his education. The speed isn't the point. The point is going at the rate the student can absorb it, and all of the subjects are kind of linked together. So if the teacher is responsible for the student's whole day, and he has a quiet, well-disciplined place in which to learn, I think it's good for the teacher to follow the student continuously and to have one teacher. Or if he has more than one teacher, for the teachers to change rooms, not the students. But there are different opinions of that, and it's been traditional in our high schools, for example, to have a teacher in each subject. But they're all interlinked. And if this teacher teaches a student all the time, she is able better to know how he's doing and meter things for him. Maybe he needs to spend 2 hours on his math and only less time on his English, or maybe 2 hours on an English and less time on his math. And that's not an absolute, because sometimes he'll be finding the English more careful, or literature more difficult, and sometimes he'll be finding the math more difficult. So I think a good system is where the teacher is dedicated to the student. And if you want variety, you could swap teachers once a year or something.
Yeah. You mentioned the math concept, in a progression aspect of it. I'm thinking, Now, is that complicated math too? I mean, you start off with 1 and 1 is 2, but then all of a sudden
Oh,
you get
well,
calculus. and
I,
all
I
that
can
good
tell
stuff.
you what is
But you said
capable
math.
because we have a lot of experience in homeschooling.
Okay.
About 100,000 children have homeschooled with the curriculum that my children and I produce. An ordinary student can complete calculus by the time he's 16 or 17. An extraordinary student can complete it at 14. And that's the highest level that K through 12 ever reaches. Now, we have kids graduating from public schools that can't do ordinary arithmetic when they're 18. That's just crazy. But in fact, that depends on metering the math to the student and changing. For example, one thing we do, this is not to advocate this, but as an example, we have textbooks we use that have 30 problems. If the student's getting 95% of them right, and he's only taking half an hour at his math, we may give him 2 lessons, he does 60. If he's missing a third of them, and it's taken him 3 hours, he goes back to 15. And if it keeps going, he goes back to 10. You reduce the rate of learning when he's having difficulty, and you raise the rate of learning when it's going easily. And I could use an example. 2 of my children finished calculus at 14, and yet sometimes they were only going very slowly because they hit kinds of math that were just difficult conceptually for them to grasp. Sometimes they were doing 2 lessons, and sometimes they were doing half a lesson. So if you should have a system whereby the speed with which the student goes, whether it's math or science or literature or whatever, is consistent with his difficulty in comprehending the important points in that subject that he is learning. Some things are very complex, they're hard, they're conceptual, they're not mechanical. And you can forget all the mechanics. What you have to gain is the confidence to know that given the truth, you can figure out what is true, and you can, with your own mind, and apply it. That's the goal.
Wow.
And we have, as I said, British schoolboys were taught to read and write Latin and Greek because the math we have was just being invented and we had no science. So they used the highest level of knowledge they had simply to train their minds. Do you think a soldier were going to use Latin and Greek? I mean, but that was the way it was. And we have better things to use this way now, so we have better material to use. But the goal is not to teach you calculus. Very few people will use it in their lives. It's a form of mental training.
Boy, I tell you, this process that you're talking to, just the application to really put it within a system, and then at the same time being able to train someone to understand that, and then you start thinking about, once a teacher get the certification to teach, is that being taught, and is she being taught, he or she being taught?
That means she's got a good start.
She got a good start. Okay.
A good start. People are complex. She's got a good start. She needs to have continuing education with her fellow teachers, and she's going to get experience. I'm speaking from 50 years of experience, but you notice I'm reading experts. And this is not trivial. This is complex. People are complex, and yet we're people, and we want to optimize our lives and the lives of people around us. And to do that, we have to do our best with what our God-given talents are.
Well, that's the future, too, by the way. The
the
kids
whole
are the future, right?
Yeah.
One retires, and all of a sudden, there's compensation there,
yes.
as far as the flow is concerned.
And it's a lot of fun because training a young mind is a lot of fun. Watching an untrained mind go out in the world and be lied to by a bunch of politicians and other self-interested creeps is not a lot of fun. And I'd like to see a lot less of that.
Yes. It makes a lot of sense, too. Well, what we're going to do, we're going to go on and maybe take a short break, and we're going to continue a little bit more, but I want to really get into, are we spending the right dollars, the cost, if you will, to get these kids educated and be able to utilize those instructions and those whatever training to accomplish the goal, and that is to have an educated society.
We
and
want to
all
learn the truth about our
the
educational
truth.
system.
Yes. Okay, we'll take a short break and we'll be right back with Art Robinson, and we'll really get down to what it costs, if you will, to get this done. Okay?
You are watching Oregon Voters Digest. This program can be seen again on these channels on these dates and times. Tell a friend.
Back again, Oregon Voters Digest. I'm Bruce Broussard, your host. Again, my guest today is Art Robinson, and we're talking about education. And what we're going to do is we're doing two segments. One was to define education. We did that the first half hour. And for those of you who maybe just joined us, you might want to go back. As you know, you got the schedules and whatever, and catch up with us that way. But now this particular segment, we're going to talk to what it costs, and from a taxpayer standpoint, and what we feel, what we've set up, what we have set up, if you will, to accomplish those goals that we talked about on the first half of the deal. So I'm going to go on and let Art just begin on that particular point, and I'll just sort of interject every so often those questions.
Okay, well,
so
it's
what
fine.
about cost now?
It's fine to make all those fine statements in the first segment,
Yes,
but
yes.
it's got to be paid for.
It's got to be paid for,
for.
and I'll tell you in the Portland, and I'm using Portland Public
Yeah.
School because that's the area that we're in.
I'm going to use
and that's
the
what
Port-
and that's what we.
We'll talk about Portland.
And we talk about this. It's the largest district in the state. Right?
First thing to understand is it's going to be paid for by taxes.
By taxes.
And that is a tradition as old as our country.
Right.
The one-room schoolhouses were paid for by the farmers whose children were in the schools. And we thoroughly understand that we need an educated population, and every child needs an opportunity for a great education. So that costs money, and it's collected by taxes. One interesting thing I want to mention about the taxes is we're all paying them. A person who doesn't think they pay taxes is making a mistake. When you go to the grocery store, you pay the taxes of the farmer and the trucker and the grocer and everybody else. When you buy fuel, you pay the taxes of everybody in the petroleum industry. No matter how poor you are, if you've got $5 in your pocket and you spend it, a third to 40% of that is paid in taxes. Typically, income taxes for a normally affluent person run around 40% plus his property taxes. So we all pay taxes, and even a poor person pays at least a third of everything he pays to someone is taken in taxes to pay the taxes of the people that provide the service. And mostly our schools, it's traditional to pay them with property taxes. So if you're renting, you're paying the property taxes of the person who owns the house in your rent. But the property taxes are collected for the schools. All right, now let's consider this quantitatively, some truth if you want. In Portland, if you look up on the internet, it's very easy to find, in a couple of minutes, you will find the number of students in Portland, K through 12, and the total amount of money spent by the schools for the students. It might not be quite right, there's off-budget stuff, but those are the two numbers. Divide the total amount by the students, you find out how much it is per student. And if you figure 30 students per class, you multiply by 30, you know how much each class is spending. The amount of money in the Portland schools being spent for each 30-student classroom for 9 months, for each 9-month session of a 30-student classroom, is $400,000 per year.
Now is that for the whole 30?
That's for the 30 students.
For 30 students?
For the 30
per
students.
student?
No, for the whole class.
Okay, good, okay.
So
400,000.
I've taken the amount per student and multiplied by 30.
Right, okay.
So a classroom with 30 students costs the taxpayer $400,000 per 9 months.
Wow.
Now let's look at that, how the money's being spent. How much are we paying the teachers? How much are we paying for the room? Well, let's look at it this way. How much could we spend? If you were to give every teacher in the public schools in Portland that teaches full-time teachers, if you gave every full-time teacher $130,000 a year, it's a lot of money.
Okay.
It's a lot more than they're making now.
Okay.
I'm talking about wages, benefits. That's what you're paying, $130,000. And you paid $20,000 to rent the room for 9 months.
Okay.
On a square foot basis, that's the cost of the finest homes in the city. I mean,
Okay.
you got it.
Okay.
So if you paid $130,000 to that teacher, gave her a terrific raise, that would attract the best teachers and other things. $20,000 for the room, that's $150,000. You still got $250,000 left over.
Okay.
That's going to people who do not teach. It's going to activities which are not involving education. They are not teaching. When my uncle was teaching school after the war, he's in the Navy, he comes back from World War II, and he starts teaching school in rural Iowa again. He taught a full load of classes, and they gave him a few bucks extra to be superintendent of schools. Those Iowa farmers were not paying anybody who didn't teach. Today, the superintendent of schools in Portland, I don't know what he makes, probably $300,000 a year. And there's a whole bevy of them. But think of what that money could buy. Let's say we're building a system with the $400,000 instead of talking about what's there. $250,000 per classroom per year. At the end of 12 years is $3 million. $3 million divided among the 30 students is a $100,000 college education for every student in that classroom.
Wow.
If you were to say today, we will not spend any of the education taxes on anyone who does not teach a full load of classes or on the renting of the room facility for them to teach in. Just cold turkey. We won't spend it on anybody who doesn't run a full load of classes. The people doing the teaching will get a terrific raise, and without raising taxes, you could give a free college education to every student in Portland.
Wow.
That's what you could do. So I would say that's better
Yes,
than what
it
we're
is.
doing.
Yeah, right.
And moreover, there's another point. And I'm not demonizing all the administrators.
Right.
They have jobs. They've applied for a job. They're told what to do and so forth. But the fact is that most of what they do is counterproductive because they don't get paid this money, even though they're not teaching, and then go on vacation. They stay in the schools making rules and regulations, generating paperwork, making it harder for the teachers to teach. All that's going to go on in that thing is what goes on in the student's mind, and it's the teacher and a highly disciplined, quiet environment in which to teach. And maybe a desk for every student and a set of books. And you don't need to spend $100 on books that the publisher printed for $5. But all the special interests are in there. They've got control. It's just like other things in the government. But at the time the special interests and the unions and the non-teaching people and the administrators who aren't at fault because they're just doing the job they were given, by the time all these people are done, they've spent that $250,000 and are demanding more. But all you would have to do, I mean, just think about it.
It's pretty.
$130,000 to the teacher. Man, they come from all over the country trying to get into Portland schools. That's good money.
Yeah, that's good money.
$20,000 for the room. You could be renting the best houses in Portland at that price.
Yes.
That's $150,000. You save the rest, and every kid in the class gets a full college education.
Wow.
There's one caveat. He has to learn his K through 12 so that he can thrive in college.
Right.
But my guess is he'd thrive. So we are not underfunding the schools. Now, I'm not here to argue for lower taxes or higher taxes or anything. We have the taxes we have. That's what we're paying. The $400,000 per classroom in Portland is a little higher than the national average, but not a lot higher. It's a little higher. And some places are a little lower. The national average is maybe 375 or something. But Portland taxpayers are not overpaying, and they're giving them plenty of money. But if you keep it the same, right at today's prices, you just gave a free college education to every. And remember, Booker T. Washington gave a free education to all of the people at Tuskegee. He did that by telling the American people that these young people needed an education, and by telling the students, you better work hard so somebody else earned the money for your education, and if you don't work here, I'm going to put you out and get somebody who will work. But right out of the goodness of the hearts of the American people came a free education for everybody at Tuskegee. Now, you had a very fine educator who was a fine orator to earn that, raise that money, but he did. The American people would not mind. The idea with these socialists that are after Trump claiming that they should have free education and free this and free that, if you add it all up, free medicine, there isn't that much money in the country if they get 100% of taxes. But I'm not arguing. I'm pointing out that the 400,000 is plenty if you just don't pay it to people who don't teach, and you don't pay it for facilities that don't teach. A room, books, and a fine teacher, and interaction between the teachers. And as far as administration, how much administration is there in providing the resources for a classroom? You tell the teachers to do it, just like they told my uncle to do it. Why? Why not? They can order their own books. They can do that stuff. They can get together and make an order for the whole school. It's no problem. The teachers can do all that stuff. But if they teach a full load of classes and they're paid superbly, and they have and you have to have discipline. You can't have a bunch of people running around saying, no, 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 you mustn't spoil a child's self-esteem, or you mustn't criticize him, or if he's raising heck in class and nobody else can study, you just have to let him do it. You have to have a disciplined, quiet environment in that $20,000 room, and you have to have a teacher who's highly motivated, and there's no question they would be highly motivated by that kind of money. That's all you need.
How much was that for the teachers? You
Well,
set aside,
in this thought experiment,
right.
I'm not
Approximately.
in my thought experiment, I used $130,000
$130,000. Wow.
for 9 months of work.
Ooh, wow.
All right, and she has to do a little administrating because the administrator disappeared. $130,000 for the teacher, and for her, and you give her the money. She can provide her own retirement, or maybe the government will require Social Security, so she has to pay. And $130,000 for her, and $20,000 to rent the room. Obviously, you wouldn't rent one room; you'd have a building. But at that square footage you require for and a desk for every student, and books. Books don't cost much. They're trivial to make, but of course they cost a fortune, because the special interest in the book companies.
Yeah.
You want to buy a math textbook, or you want to buy a science textbook or something, it costs you $50, maybe $100, crazy. But books, desks, teachers, and students. That's what education is. It is not any of this other stuff. Now, somebody will say, well, what about sports? Sports are important, and it's very good for the students. When my uncle was teaching, they had sports. It was all amateur. There are men all over this country who would love to coach sports. Those towns in Iowa all competed against each other. My dad was a pitcher and a wrestler, and he loved his sports. Sports are not going away, but you don't have to spend $1 zillion on all kinds of paraphernalia. Now, people will say I'm going up against the sports. I'm not. If the American people want to tax themselves specifically to provide sports, they can do it, although they can tax themselves by going to the games and participating and enjoying it. But education is what this is for. And I think that thought experiment's a good one. Pay those teachers a lot more, attract the best teachers in the country, pay for a really good facility and a desk and books for the students, and you save enough money with current taxes, every one of those kids can have a full college education.
Wow. You know, when you think about our present system here within the state of Oregon, and things come up like PERS, You know what I mean? And you sort of mentioned the fact that with that 130 some odd $1,000.
Well, that's PERS just a way to hide part of the thing. The teacher, of course, didn't get anywhere near 130,000, and they pay the teacher and they figure out their budget for that, and then they put the PERS over here, which is the retirement. Well, it's really all one thing, and I'm suggesting 130,000 would.
Well, that'd be more
I
than
mean, the teacher, the average income of a skilled worker in this country is 50,000. And maybe I don't know how you'd split it. Maybe you give the teacher 90,000 and put 40,000 away for her retirement. You could split it into that and the retirement, or you could just give it all to them and have them save for themselves. That's not the point. The point is, what is the teacher costing you? And if you want to continue PERS, you want to continue some kind of retirement fund, you allot part of the 130,000 of that, but the teacher knows it's there and she watches it accumulate and she feels motivated. But if you could increase the cost, the pay of all these teachers by 50-60%, and still put away plenty for their retirement.
Wow.
If you use 130,000.
Right.
Now that's an example, but it works out. That's what it is. Okay, you can say, oh, it's nice to have the administrators. It's nice to have all these special. Really, education is extremely important to the American people, and the result is they pay a lot of money for it. And they look the other way as all these special interests ride on it, and you get to the point where the students are just an excuse to pass the money through. You're only passing about a third of the students now. And people that are in that 2/3, that are getting money that don't teach, the individuals are not responsible. Somebody seeks a job as a high school administrator, you can't fault them. The job is there. They'll go in. They'll try to do the job. But the fact the job isn't necessary. Now you can say, well, it would be nice if we have all these administrators. It would be nice if we had these fancy textbooks instead of a little cheaper paper and half the price. It would be nice if we had all these things. But I think you roll everything together that you're getting in the public schools, besides the education, besides what goes in the classroom, and compare that to a full-ride college scholarship, I think I know which one I choose.
Wow. You know, as you were talking to this piece, and in terms of cost and whatever, I think about how much money we're constantly spending, and every year when the legislature meets, it's always, well, we got to get more money for the schools.
Oh, well, that's good politics, you see. Now, I run for, people know, I run for Congress against Congressman DeFazio.
Right.
And DeFazio, he's big on education. He wants more money for the schools. He always wants more money for the schools. Now, he knows that 2/3 of that is going to go to his union friends who are going to give him campaign cash. It's not really, it's sort of self-serving.
That's part of it.
But all the politicians, they want the education unions off their backs, or they want their support. And so they're all saying they're for education. How can you be against it? Then you're against the children.
Yeah, the kids, yep.
You're going to be against the kids.
Yep.
So all the politicians have to say they're for education. But are they? Let's talk about Washington, D.C. Now, the 10th Amendment of the Constitution leaves education to the states. The states are the states and the people.
Okay.
So in Oregon, the states and the people are responsible for education. But there's one place in the country that's different. Washington, D.C. is run by the U.S. Congress. Washington, D.C. is completely administered by the U.S. Congress. So there are 50,000 K through 12 students in Washington, D.C. that are responsible to the U.S. Congress. 67% are black, 17% are Hispanic, and it's a very poor community economically.
Okay.
Most of those students graduate from high school unable to read effectively. While those politicians, Republican and Democrat, while the politicians in Washington strut about the streets with their $175,000 salaries, all saying they're for the kids, 50,000 kids in Washington, D.C. scurry about beneath their feet, most of whom know almost no math and have very, very poor even reading skills. Those are terrible schools, the worst in the country. And what would you expect? Those should be the best schools in the country. Those should be setting an example for the states. Instead of the worst, for setting an example, all right, a counterexample. The politicians are not going to fix this. They're just going to say, we're for the kids, we'll give them some more money. But they don't seem to care about what happens to the money.
Wow.
It's just, I'm for the kids. I want more money for the schools.
Well, but again, we're looking for results. You know, these are our futures. for
Yeah,
that matter.
results.
And like you said, the idea is that picking on the kids, using the kids to do this, but at the end of the day, they're not being
Now,
taught.
let me tell you another result that's been in the news a lot. It's the bias, the racial bias. They talk about how these Asian Americans are making higher SAT scores than the whites, and the whites are getting more SAT scores than the blacks, and so forth. The main reason for that, there's no difference in learning ability. The main reason for that is that the Asian homes are working hard to make up for the failures of the public schools. And the white people's homes aren't working as hard. And you see what I mean?
I got you.
And if someone is living in poverty, they aren't working as hard. But those differences are largely differences that are created because the public schools have been failing. And different ethnic groups, for historical reasons, pick up the ball from the public schools a little better. And then there's a group of several million kids being homeschooled. And they're not all being well homeschooled. There's some pretty bad schools. But there, the families are trying to pick up the ball from the public schools. So we have a lot of things. We didn't have homeschooling when I went to school. The schools were great. 60 years ago, America had the best public schools in the world. And my whole life was caused by, I mean, I got into Caltech. I had a wonderful life in science. The public schools gave that to me. Our public schools were fabulous. And this has happened to us in the last half century. But the fights we're having over ethnicity in the colleges and stuff, they all really originate in the public schools. Because if everybody goes to public schools, as they did 50 years ago, and everybody gets a really good chance at a first-rate education, then you won't see those differences. But you see them today because the public schools have become very bad, and they're not doing the job, and different ethnic communities are picking up the ball a little more. Homeschoolers are doing a little better than the non-homeschoolers because those parents are highly motivated, and on average they do better, even though a lot of them don't have good schools. So you're seeing a lot of aberrations in our society that are caused by the lack of quality in our public schools. And of course, if we don't have good education, we're going to lose out to the countries that do. Right now, in K through 12 education, America ranks essentially last in the developed world.
Wow.
Whereas when I was going to school, there was no comparison. The American schools were better than anything else in the world. This has all happened in the last half century, while all of the special interests that spend that other 2/3 of the money were getting their tentacles into our public school system. As I said, after the war, my dad had, my uncle had to run a full load of classes, and then he could be an administrator for a few bucks.
Gee, weird.
That's the way and if you go back, people sometimes do this. They give you exams to take that were given in those schools back after the war. You and I had failed those tests. I mean, those kids really learned a lot. But over the last century, and especially the last half century, our schools have gradually gone downhill. And even though we pour more and more money into them, as we've seen from this illustration, that money's not going to the classroom.
Wow.
And that's a problem.
And you know, the other thing that gets me about this whole piece, again, as you mentioned when we talked about what is education and then the cost, and you were talking about the amount of monies that, you know, let's say within this particular district, some $400,000
per classroom.
Per classroom. And you mentioned scholarships and things along that particular line. And here now we're talking about the failure of the kids getting an education aspect of it. They can't go to college because they can't pass the SAT.
Well, that's right.
Let's talk about that for a minute.
Well, I mentioned that briefly. You need to give them a good K through 12 education, or the college. Now, if everybody's getting into college, the colleges are not going to refuse them, but they're not going to get much out of college. They're not going to learn well.
Right.
So it's essential to give a young person, for example, if you don't teach a student to read until he's 13, he'll never be a good reader. And if you don't, there's kind of a race between the development of a young mind and its education. And that race takes place between the ages of about 6 and 18. If you don't run that race in a productive manner, you will get a lot less out of college. But you will get something from it, and I'm for even though we know some of the students, no matter how well we do, would not really be college ready. I'm for sending them all to college anyway. It's all paid for already.
Yeah,
We're
but
paying for it now.
You can do it on this other end, as opposed to where we are now. Was it $3 trillion or something
Well, we're
like
paying
that?
for it now. We're going to pay
Student
the
loan
400,000, and
program.
we can
That's
make
already done.
teacher happy
Yeah.
and make a classroom that works. That's the nature. That's the only thing
Right,
that matters in
right,
those
right.
schools. And if we can send them all to college, besides, everybody's going to get something out of it.
Yeah, yeah. Because as I think about it now today, is that they supposedly graduate with at the end of 12, right?
Yeah.
And then go to college, and now all of a sudden they're sitting up with another
Now,
bill.
don't make a mistake about that.
Gee.
We got socialist politicians out there saying they're going to give everybody a free college
That's what I'm saying.
education.
That's what we
No,
said
no,
that-
that's on top of what we got.
That's what I'm saying. Yes.
That's on top of it.
Oh my God!
And when they tax the
stuck with
people
it.
to do
Yes,
that,
yes.
that means everybody pays the taxes, including the poor man whose hamburger now costs $5.50 instead of $5 because of those taxes. They're going to, and it'll diminish the economy, cost us jobs, all kinds of terrible things.
Senior citizen living
I'm
on
talking about using the money we have now,
Yeah,
not
exactly.
one of these people that says, well,
Exactly.
medicine will be free and education will be
yes,
free and everybody can lay down and somebody else will pay for it. That's baloney.
Wow. Because I think about
And you know
senior
something, when you talk about that, a poor man pays higher taxes than a rich man.
citizen. Yeah. Wow.
Now, I'm not talking about the lawyers that got him out of taxes. A poor man, a dollar means a lot more to him. If he pays $5.50 for a hamburger instead of $5, that means a lot to a poor man because he doesn't have very much money. When a rich man pays $5.50 for the hamburger, it doesn't bother him. So not only do the poor pay the taxes just like the rest of us, because they pay all our taxes when they buy stuff we produce for them, but they also are hit harder because they don't have much money.
Right.
And when you don't have much money, the amount you have means a lot more to you. So this is also a big problem, and you don't, because people will say, the politicians will say, well, you know, the rich ought to pay for all this, you don't have to pay. And the guy says to himself, yeah, I don't have to pay any income taxes, I don't make enough money. But every time he goes to the grocery store, he pays the income taxes of everybody that put that food in the store for him.
Well, imagine all the.
He doesn't realize that, but he does.
What about the senior citizens who are caught, who's had to sign off on that line for little Johnny going to school?
Well,
and
when
all
the
of a sudden
senior
they're-
citizens,
Gee.
so anyone who says to himself, I don't pay taxes, that means he doesn't have any money, because the moment he spends money, he pays the taxes of the people he spends it on.
Boy, on that particular note, you're just right on. We got to get you back here. We got to
Well,
get you back here on this.
we're having
next-
fun anyway.
This.
I hope there are no public school administrators outside the door.
Well, they should be. It's going to be played again, and hopefully they'll listen to what's going on. Because we got a problem. We got a problem.
Administrators in the public schools are sharp people who work hard, and they need to get They need work somewhere else, not using up our school money. That's my opinion.
Right. Well, folks, I hope you got something out of this particular session with my dear friend Art, and we're going to have him back here because taxes is key. we're dealing with these issues right now here at the state level. There are a lot of other things going on, whatever. But anyway, I hope you learned something on this end of it. We want to thank Art for being with us today.
Thank you, Fred.
And we're going to get him back here again. Okay, fine. Hey, you have a good evening. I'll see you next weekend. Take care.
Thanks.